Every story has two sides, hero and villain. But have you ever thought, could a villain also be a victim of circumstance? Today, we'll explore the story of a sorceress whose color and power made her a symbol of hatred. But this story will show you how a pure heart can one day turn into the world's most infamous wicked witch. The fascinating world of Wicked will change your perspective. It's the story of a villain like you've never heard before. The movie begins in a small village. The entire village is in a celebratory mood. Everyone is overjoyed because they believe that the most terrifying witch in their history is dead. The news spreads to every corner of the village, and people erupt in jubilant celebration. Amidst the excitement, a figure appears, the Queen of Fairies, Glinda. Glinda is stunningly beautiful, gentle by nature, and immensely powerful. She confirms to the villagers that the witch is indeed no longer alive. Posters of the witch are put up all over the village, as if to remind everyone of the relief her death has brought them. The villagers celebrate with dancing and laughter, believing that no shadow will ever darken their lives again. But in Glinda's eyes, there is an unsettling stillness, a calm that contradicts the joy around her. As the festivities come to an end, and Glinda prepares to leave, a little girl steps forward from the crowd and asks her, "How does someone become a witch?" Glinda smiles softly and looks at the girl, saying, "No one is born wicked. It's the hardships they face that turn them into what the world sees as evil." And with that, the scene shifts to a flashback, several years ago. In the flashback, we are introduced to a wealthy governor, a powerful man deeply in love with his wife. One evening, the governor has to leave town for an important task. Before leaving, he embraces his wife and bids her farewell. But the wife had been waiting for this moment. In the governor's absence, she had planned to spend time with her secret lover. As soon as the governor leaves, her lover arrives, and the two spend the night together in joyful indulgence. This was a time when humans and animals lived together in harmony. Animals could speak just like humans and were treated as equals. Months pass, and the governor's wife discovers she is pregnant. As time goes by, the moment of childbirth approaches. But the child she carried was far from ordinary. The governor eagerly awaited the birth of his child, imagining a healthy and beautiful baby. But when the baby was born, his dreams shattered. The child's skin was completely green. Not only that, but the baby was born with extraordinary magical abilities. When the child cried, everything around her floated into the air. Despite everything, the child was named Elphaba, or Elfie for short. But from the moment of her birth, the family and the villagers began to shun her. Her unusual appearance and powers made her the target of everyone's scorn. The only exception was a giant bear that worked in their household, a bear that could speak. He showed compassion toward Elfie and took it upon himself to care for her. As Elfie grew older, her struggles became more complex. Amidst this, her younger sister was born, a beautiful girl named Nessarose. But even though Nessarose was lovely to look at, she was born unable to walk. The governor was deeply affectionate toward Rose, which only deepened Elphaba's pain. One day, the governor instructed Elphaba to look after Rose and left the house. Not long after, a group of mischievous village children arrived and began mocking Elphaba for her unusual appearance. They ridiculed her, taunted her, and hurled cruel words her way. Unable to bear the humiliation, Elphaba's anger surged. Using her magic, she began hurling stones toward them. The chaos drew the governor back in haste. Furious, he pulled Rose away from Elphaba and forbade her from staying near her sister. The scene then shifts back to the present. Glinda is standing before a large statue. It is the statue of the very witch the entire village wishes to forget. She sets the statue ablaze, ready to leave the place forever. Just then, someone steps forward and asks her, "Was this witch your friend?" Glinda pauses, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "Friend? No, she wasn't my friend. But I knew her well. If you hear her story, you'll understand who she truly was." And with that, the story takes us back into the past once more. We see Glinda enrolling at a prestigious magic university. The campus buzzes with excitement as new students arrive, each filled with hopes and dreams. Amidst this lively atmosphere, Elphaba arrives. Her green skin and unusual presence cause everyone to freeze and stare. The entire campus whispers behind her back, their gazes heavy with judgment. But Elphaba stands her ground, her voice steady and unwavering. "I was born with green skin, and I'm proud of how I look." At that very moment, the governor arrives with Rose. In front of everyone, he presents Rose with a special gift, a pair of diamond shoes that had once belonged to their mother. From afar, Elphaba watches the scene unfold, her heart aching. Since childhood, she had never received her father's love or affection. The favoritism and rejection weighed heavily on her, making her feel even more isolated. This was also Rose's first day at the university. The governor left her in Elphaba's care before departing, saying, "Take care of Rose." The day's events continued as the new students introduced themselves. Teachers welcomed them warmly, sharing words of encouragement. But for Elphaba, this day was harder than most. Her green skin and extraordinary abilities set her apart, making her feel like an outcast. A short while later, a teacher arrived to escort Rose to a special orientation. Since Rose was the governor's daughter, she was treated with extra care and respect. Elphaba protested, asking the teacher not to take Rose alone, but her words fell on deaf ears. Frustrated, Elphaba's emotions erupted. Her powers surged uncontrollably, lifting Rose into the air along with everything around them. The teacher, terrified, fled in fear, while Rose, hurt by Elphaba's actions, walked away with tears in her eyes. From a distance, another teacher observed the incident. She was none other than Madame Dean, the headmistress of the university. She approached the scene and took responsibility for Elphaba's magical outburst. By this time, the other students had already grown hostile toward Elphaba. Madame Dean calmed the situation, declaring, "I see great potential in Elphaba's unique powers. I'll take her under my wing and ensure she finds her place here. If necessary, I'll speak to the governor myself and secure her admission to this university." Madame Dean arranged for Elphaba to share a room with Glinda. Reluctantly, Glinda agreed, while Elphaba felt an unfamiliar warmth of joy. Finally, someone believed in her. For the first time, Elphaba felt a spark of hope. She turned to Madame Dean and confided, "Whenever I get angry, magic happens. I can't control it. It just takes over." Madame Dean reassured her, "I'll teach you how to control your magic. Together, we'll turn you into a great magician." Elphaba's heart swelled with gratitude. At last, someone saw her for who she was. Not a monster, but a girl with dreams waiting to take flight. Elphaba moves into her new room, only to find that Glinda has already filled the entire space with her belongings. Without saying a word, Elphaba carefully moves Glinda's things to her side of the room. But Glinda, with an air of defiance, keeps putting her things back. Frustrated, Elphaba's anger starts bubbling inside her, and before she knows it, her magic flares uncontrollably, shattering the glass door in the room. Glinda, startled but silent, says nothing. The next morning, Elphaba once again moves Glinda's belongings aside. Without a word, the two head to class. In class, the other students eagerly flock around Glinda, laughing and chatting. But Elphaba? She is ignored, her presence an unspoken inconvenience to them all. Even in the cafeteria, no one dares to sit with her. And yet, Glinda seizes every opportunity to humiliate Elphaba in front of everyone. Soon, a new professor joins their class, Professor Dillamond, a goat who speaks like a human. Despite his calm demeanor, he struggles to pronounce Glinda's name correctly. This seemingly small mistake irritates Glinda immensely, and her disdain for him grows. Professor Dillamond begins his lecture. There was a time when humans and animals lived side by side in harmony. But as hunger and rage consumed humanity, that harmony was shattered. Before he can continue, he notices that someone has scrawled cruel words about him on the blackboard. The sight pierces his heart, and he leaves the class without finishing his lecture. Elphaba, feeling a deep sense of empathy, approaches Professor Dillamond to comfort him. Her kind and understanding nature sparks an unexpected friendship between them. After all, they both shared a profound loneliness in the university, a bond born of isolation. Meanwhile, Madame Dean takes her promise seriously and begins teaching Elphaba privately. One day she instructs her on how to lift a coin into the air and control its movement. Elphaba listens intently, focusing on every word. But as she practices, memories of how the students mocked Professor Dillamond flood her mind. Anger boils within her, and the room erupts in chaos as everything begins to levitate. Despite the disruption, Madame Dean is neither frightened nor angry. Instead, she smiles and says, "Your power is extraordinary, Elphaba. Once you learn to control it, you'll be capable of incredible things. But you must learn to temper your emotions." Elsewhere, Professor Dillamond returns to his quarters, his heart heavy with despair. Inside, other talking animals have gathered for a secret meeting. Dillamond speaks with sorrow. We are no longer respected here. Humans no longer see us as equals. They blame us for everything that goes wrong. I fear my days as a teacher are numbered. If things continue this way, our very existence will be threatened. Dillamond was the only animal professor at the university, and like the others, he was grappling with a growing sense of hopelessness. Elphaba overhears. As Elphaba leaves Madame Dean's office, she notices Dillamond walking ahead of her. Curiosity draws her to follow him, and from a distance she overhears the entire meeting. When the meeting ends, Dillamond notices her outside and invites her in. By then, the other animals have already left. "Did you hear everything?" he asks cautiously. Elphaba nods without hesitation. "Yes, I heard it all. I know how much pain you're going through. Don't worry, Professor. I'll help you, no matter what." Surprised, Dillamond asks, "How can you help us, Elphaba?" With quiet determination, she replies, "I don't know yet, but I'll do something. I'll help you and the others regain your dignity." Dillamond takes a deep breath, his eyes softening with gratitude. "Your kindness gives me hope, Elphaba, but be careful. The world isn't kind to people like you or me." After her conversation with the professor, Elphaba walked through the forest path, heading back to her room. On the way, she encountered a horse carrying a young prince on its back. The prince was a new student at the university. When the prince saw Elphaba, he froze in place. Her green skin startled him, and with a hint of fear, he blurted out, "Are you a monster?" Annoyed, Elphaba replied sharply, "How dare you call me a monster?" She then walked away, leaving the prince standing there, bewildered. As he stood alone, he muttered to himself, "This is the first time a girl has spoken to me like that." Yet within him, a strange mix of emotions began to stir: fear, anger, and a spark of fascination. Elphaba returned to her room, but her mind was buzzing with new thoughts. Meanwhile, the prince couldn't stop thinking about the green-skinned girl. The next day, every girl at the university seemed eager to attract the prince's attention. Among them was Glinda, but the prince showed no interest in anyone. Glinda, however, played her game skillfully. She acted aloof, as if the prince didn't matter to her at all. In the end, her strategy worked. The prince was impressed by her attitude. Glinda took him on a tour of the university, eventually leading him to the library. In the library, the prince tried to entertain everyone. Stacking books under his feet, he attempted to perform a magic trick. A professor arrived and warned him against such behavior, but the prince paid no heed. Soon, the once quiet library erupted in chaos, all thanks to the prince. Everyone joined in, laughing and cheering, except Elphaba. Meanwhile, a boy who had been persistently trying to impress Glinda was tricked by her into approaching Rose. The boy invited Rose to a party. Rose, thrilled, accepted the invitation. It was the first time a boy had shown interest in her, and she eagerly shared the news with Elphaba. Elphaba, however, was skeptical. She suspected this was yet another of Glinda's tricks. That night, everyone got ready for the party. Glinda looked stunning, as always. While rummaging through her wardrobe, Glinda found a witch's hat, a family heirloom from her grandmother. Since she had plenty of elegant accessories, she handed the old black hat to Elphaba and said, "This hat is perfect for you." Though Glinda intended to mock Elphaba with the gift, Elphaba was genuinely touched. At the party, everyone seemed to be having a great time. Glinda was with the prince, while Rose enjoyed herself with her new admirer. Elphaba, however, stayed on the sidelines, feeling like an outsider. Determined to face the crowd, she wore the witch's hat Glinda had given her and joined the party. As soon as the students saw her, they burst into laughter. Elphaba said nothing. Instead, she placed the hat on the ground and began to dance. The sight of her dancing made the crowd laugh even harder. After all, the party was hosted by Glinda and the hat was hers. As Elphaba's roommate, her actions felt like an embarrassment to Glinda in front of everyone. Yet seeing everyone mock Elphaba so cruelly made Glinda's heart ache. The prince nudged her and said, "You should be by her side." Moved by his words, Glinda approached Elphaba. She found her quietly crying, tears streaming down her green cheeks. Without saying a word, Glinda joined her in the dance. Slowly, one by one, the other students began dancing with Elphaba too. The atmosphere transformed from ridicule to acceptance. At one point, Glinda embraced Elphaba, and all their misunderstandings seemed to dissolve. For the first time, the students began to see Elphaba as one of their own. After the party, back in their room, Glinda told Elphaba, "I'm going to tell you my biggest secret. The prince and I are getting married soon." She then added, "Now it's your turn to share a secret. Something no one else knows." Elphaba hesitated for a moment. Then she reached under her pillow and pulled out a small green bottle. Curious, Glinda asked, "Why do you always keep that bottle with you?" With a soft, trembling voice, Elphaba replied, "It's the last thing I have of my mother. I can't let it go." Glinda sat down, overwhelmed with sadness. Seeing her, Elphaba began to open up, her voice trembling with buried pain. "My father doesn't like me because of my green skin. When my sister was about to be born, my father made my mother drink special milk every day. He believed it would ensure my sister wouldn't turn out like me." She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears before continuing. "But that magical milk caused my sister to be born prematurely. She came into this world disabled, and it took my mother's life into the process." Elphaba's voice cracked as she said, "My father blames me for everything. He says it's all my fault." Hearing this, Glinda's heart ached. She placed a comforting hand on Elphaba's shoulder and said softly, "None of this is your fault." To cheer her up, Glinda gifted Elphaba some of her finest dresses and makeup. She spent hours helping Elphaba, trying to change her look, even if just a little. For the first time in a long while, Elphaba felt truly happy. The next day, the prince noticed Elphaba's efforts to adopt Glinda's style. He walked up to her, his tone softer this time. "You don't need to copy anyone. You're perfect just the way you are." Meanwhile, it was Professor Dillamond's last day at the university. Animals were no longer allowed on campus. A group of men stormed into the classroom and forcibly dragged Dillamond away. Elphaba wanted to help, but it was too late. Shortly after, a new professor arrived in class. He carried with him a caged tiger cub, its eyes wide with fear. Standing before the students, he declared, "From now on, animals will not live among us. They will exist under our control." Elphaba's anger flared as she watched the helpless cub in chains. She couldn't accept this cruelty. She had brought a bouquet of flowers to give to Professor Dillamond as a farewell gift. But now, overcome with frustration, she dropped the flowers. To her surprise, the flowers didn't fall to the ground. They floated in the air. In a matter of moments, everyone in the class, except Elphaba and the prince, fell unconscious. Seizing the opportunity, the two freed the tiger cub and released it into the forest. When Professor Dean entered the classroom, she found the students unconscious. Recognizing Elphaba's magic at work, a faint smile crossed her lips. Back in her office, Dean found an emergency letter. It was from the wizard, summoning her for an urgent matter. Later in the forest, a conversation between Elphaba and the prince turned into a heated argument. The prince began to walk away, but Elphaba grabbed his hand, her voice almost pleading. "I need your help," she said, her eyes betraying feelings she had kept hidden. Deep down, Elphaba knew she could never have the prince. This realization broke her heart, and she often found herself watching him from afar. She saw him with Glinda, laughing and smiling, a perfect picture of what she could never have. The next morning, Professor Dean summoned Elphaba. The entire school gathered as Dean made an announcement. She revealed a surprise for Elphaba. "The wizard has granted you permission to visit him. There, you'll learn advanced magic and become the extraordinary person you were meant to be." Elphaba's heart soared. This was what she had always dreamed of, a chance to prove herself. When the time came, a beautiful green train arrived to take her to the Emerald City. Before she left, Glinda approached her, her voice tinged with sadness. "The prince has changed. He doesn't give me the time he used to." Just as Elphaba was about to board the train, the prince arrived. He handed her a flower but didn't even glance at Glinda. Hurt and confused, Glinda watched him walk away, her heart heavy. As the train prepared to leave, Glinda handed Elphaba a card. Inside it read, "I want to come with you." Elphaba, touched by the gesture, smiled warmly. She reached out, holding Glinda's hand, and pulled her onto the train. When the train stopped, they arrived in the Emerald City, a place of unparalleled beauty. The entire city shimmered in shades of green, its brilliance taking their breath away. As they entered, they were greeted with a grand welcome. It felt like stepping into a magical world. The city hosted the most spectacular magic show to honor their arrival. After the show, they made their way to the wizard's palace, their hearts brimming with awe and anticipation. To reach the wizard, Elphaba and Glinda had to pass through tight security. The palace was guarded by a troop of winged monkeys. The wizard welcomed Elphaba warmly, gifting her a golden coin. He showed them a model of a future city he had designed, a breathtakingly beautiful vision. At Elphaba's suggestion, he made the streets of the model city golden, just as she imagined. Then he asked Elphaba, "What is your heart's desire?" With sincerity, Elphaba replied, "I don't enjoy controlling others. All I want is to help the animals." She asked for his help in this mission. Just then, Professor Dean arrived, making Elphaba even more excited. The wizard instructed a monkey to uncover a mysterious ancient book. The moment Elphaba approached the book, it opened on its own. The wizard gestured toward a monkey and said, "This little monkey has always dreamed of flying." But Elphaba, ignoring his words, focused on reading the spells aloud from the book. As she read, the monkey began to cry out in pain. By the time she finished the spell, the wings had burst from the monkey's back. But its agony only grew, leaving Elphaba horrified. When she stepped outside, she saw the other monkeys, each of them suffering the same fate. Elphaba couldn't bear to see their torment. The truth began to dawn on her. The wizard and Professor Dean were behind the suffering of the animals. Worse, the wizard wasn't even capable of performing real magic. They had brought Elphaba here to use her powers for their own selfish agenda. They couldn't even read the ancient book of spells themselves. The wizard and Dean tried to lure Elphaba with promises and flattery, but she refused to cooperate. Taking the spell book, Elphaba decided to leave. In desperation, the wizard made Glinda a tempting offer. "Help us capture Elphaba, and I'll make you a wizard." Glinda, torn between her loyalty to Elphaba and her own ambitions, tried to stop her friend. Meanwhile, Dean announced to the entire kingdom, "Elphaba is a wicked witch. She will kill anyone who stands in her way." The wizard blamed all their problems on Elphaba and commanded the monkey soldiers to capture her. Elphaba and Glinda found themselves trapped in a locked room. Glinda, unwilling to lose her chance of becoming a wizard, pleaded with Elphaba, "Just listen to them, just once." But Elphaba stood firm. She wouldn't compromise her values. The two attempted to escape on a makeshift parachute. Just as they were about to fly away, the palace guards sealed the roof, and the parachute caught fire. They had no choice but to abandon the parachute. Surrounded by guards, escape seemed impossible. Suddenly, a broomstick flew into the room and stopped at Elphaba's feet. Grasping it, she soared into the air, using her newfound power to frighten the soldiers. Back at the university, Dean announced, "Elphaba has stolen the spellbook. She's a witch." The students struggled to believe this accusation. But Glinda, lured by Dean's promises, chose to align herself with him. From a distance, Elphaba saw her best friend standing by Dean's side. Her heart shattered. Grief-stricken and furious, Elphaba used her powers to destroy the wizard's perfect city. In an instant, the dazzling Emerald City plunged into darkness. Mounting her broomstick, Elphaba fled toward the mountains, disappearing into the horizon. And so the movie ends with a powerful message. Villains are not born, they are made. It is the cruelty of the world and the actions of society that force someone to become a villain. This was just the first part of Elphaba's story. Perhaps in the next chapter we will see her rise as a fearsome sorceress. Until then, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Goodbye.